Thanks, Tom.
Sure. Okay. Again, Tom Quaadman with the U.S. Chamber. I want to thank Dr. Prabhakar for her words, and I really want to thank John Delaney for his leadership and being such a driving force with what we're doing at the Chamber on AI. So thank you. And of course, I'm joined by Senator Todd Young from Indiana. I'm going to start it off in a little bit of an unusual Washington way. I want to give you two thank yous. One, thank you not only for your service in the Senate, but also for your past service in the Marine Corps. And really want to thank you for your leadership on the CHIPS and Science Act. That would not have happened without you. So I thank you on that as well.
You're welcome.
So Senator, sort of maybe starting from there, right? Because you're one of the leaders in Congress and the Senate on AI. And obviously we just, you've been involved in the future of the AI Act. And as we just said, the passage of the CHIPS and Science Act. And CHIPS just passed a little while ago, wasn't that far ago. But when you look at it from the AI lens, it was almost eons ago.
Right.
So how has the conversation around AI in Congress been developing over the years?
Well, thanks, Tom. I'll dive right into that question. I want to, of course, thank the Chamber for hosting this and allowing me to be part of it. But, the way I look at it is there's been a continuum in my own office and among a number of members of Congress who are worked on the CHIPS and Science Act and all the previous iterations of it. There are three things, as so many of your attendees know, that we need to be thinking about when we consider the evolution of artificial intelligence models. It's programming and the ability of our software and computer engineers to come up with new programming innovations on a going forward basis. There's data. How do you collect more of it? How do you make that data relevant? How do those data parameters made uniform so that we can feed more data into systems? And the last piece of it is compute. It takes us back to microprocessors and the need to ensure American competitiveness and the competitiveness of friends and allies in developing the best-in-class microprocessors. And so here we are. You put together those three dynamics, and it just so happens that we passed CHIPS and Science, and almost just 6 months later, we've got ChatGPT online, and we're all thinking sort of retrospectively, oh my goodness, it's a good thing we passed the CHIPS Act, because there's no way we're going to keep up with PRC or other bad actors who may want to embed within these AI systems their own values rather than the values of the Enlightenment or the Declaration of Independence. So that's how we're thinking about it. I think increasingly there's a recognition on the Hill that your national security committees aren't confined to Intel and the Armed Services Committee. We've got to be thinking about our national innovation base. That's talent, that's your ed and workforce type committees, help. That's commerce, that's finance as we think about R&D provisions and other important provisions so that, again, we can incentivize the innovators and entrepreneurs in this company to keep making new things and crossing new frontiers in their engineering. And increasingly, that's how members, I find, are talking about this issue. It's investments in R&D in research, for example, on the Hill, where I think they would fall within the general welfare category. If you think about the Constitution and our charge to look after the general welfare. Recently, I've seen a pivot to discussion of research as a competitiveness and a national security imperative, something a few of us have been talking about for years, but it was more reminiscent of the Sputnik era, and we've returned I think in terms of how we're thinking about these things to that era. It is indeed a competition as we talk about these issues.
So you're part of the Senate
I
work.
hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, thank you.
right.
And we can dive into this a little further. And
Yeah.
you're part of the Senate Working Group, which has gotten a lot of press, particularly in the last few days, right? So you
Yeah.
have yourself and Senator Rounds, and you have Senator Heinrich and Senator Schumer. So can you talk a little bit about how did that group come about? What are the goals of the working group? And what's the process you see of getting there?
Well, it'll be no surprise to anyone that Senator Schumer and I mean, we had that pre-existing relationship from Chips and Science. It was a productive, constructive, respectful, trusted, and ultimately, successful relationship. And we decided to get the band back together again, so to speak, right? So that's why I'm involved. And then Senators Rounds and Heinrich have been leaders within the Senate, leaders of the Senate AI caucus for some period of time. So they have some subject matter expertise and knowledge, and we thought collectively this would be a good way to get things done within the Senate. The follow-up question was, what are we?
What are the goals, and what's the
Okay.
process to get there?
It was pretty clear to us, there's still a little bit of this, some chortling about United States senators tackling artificial intelligence when sometimes we struggle to define it, right? And I understand that. And in recognition of the reality associated with that joke, I mean, there is indeed, that humor is informed by the reality. This can be very complex stuff. We know it's complex when even the developers themselves struggle to explain how their frontier models work. So we should enter this with a lot of humility. That humility should inform our legislative work. Frankly, we need more pre-education than we typically receive or get involved in before we decide to legislate. Now, we legislate about all kinds of very complicated things about which we don't have extensive expertise going in. The FAA reauthorization is something that's on our plate right now. There aren't many aviation experts in the United States Senate, but we still figure out how to interact with the world's foremost experts and come up with a decent work product. That's our aim here. Mm-hmm. And I think, I know there's been a lot of skepticism. Some of it has been vocalized, through the media. We're hearing less of that now. Mm-hmm. We're hearing less than that. Even some of the most vocal critics of these AI forums were in the room, and they tended to stay longest and receive some positive feedback from them in the most recent one. So what's next? We're going to have some more forums where we get into specific issues in a more granular way. Bias and innovation, and I have some ideas about a new issue or two we'll add, but those will continue into the first quarter of next year. And then at that point, I would anticipate, to the extent there is legislating to be done, and there probably will be some, Senator Schumer will green light, after consultation with his chairman and hopefully ranking members, a regular order process. We'll go through the committees of jurisdiction and consider and start marking up legislation.
So let me just raise one of the issues that's sort of been talked a lot about. So some have said, okay, AI, we're going to need a new standalone regulatory agency to deal with AI. Mm-hmm. And you have said, okay, that's a fundamental question that needs to be answered, because that's sort of where you can then decide what direction to take. What are your thoughts about it? Is there a need for an agency like that or not?
Still learning.
Okay.
And I don't want to, answer a question like that with finality. But my own view is we probably do not want to have a new agency focused on a particular type of technology. I think instead, I am increasingly hearing from the world's best minds and many colleagues alike, and they're not always the same people, of course, that we need to be thinking of AI and its adoption throughout society in a use case specific fashion. To me, that makes a whole lot of sense. And what that lends itself to, yeah, there may be some sort of whole of government responses and policies that need to be promulgated and coordinated across departments. So you can have some folks in the White House who are focused on that. Maybe it's a Rati's group. They're given some more resources, maybe some more personnel. Maybe they can be tasked with that. Maybe it's another group of individuals, sort of a role of almost like a national security council, where they coordinate across departments. But I think most of the work is going to be done within USDA and Commerce and Defense and on. And the challenge will be to adapt existing statutes, existing prohibitions, existing public law to an AI-enabled society. That will mean rewriting regulations. That will mean raising the proverbial flag when there is an unanticipated or a new challenge that emerges within that department's jurisdiction, informing Congress that maybe new authorities are needed in particular areas. It is already against the law to do most of the things that people are concerned about within the AI context. It's against the law to engage in fraud. It is against the law to mix and release biological agents. It is against the law to include racial or ethnic bias in one's credit decisions for purposes of buying a home. So the challenge is how do you, in this AI-enabled world, apply those existing prohibitions to new circumstances. I think that will require, to go full circle here, a lot more expertise in government and more agility, systems in which we allow people within government to bring on more expertise, and maybe in a short-term consultative fashion, so that we can carry out the aforesaid functions.
So this morning when I opened up our
Not a new agency.
Not a new agency.
Yeah.
So when I opened up our session this morning, we announced the Chamber's launching its Responsible AI Business Leadership Initiative.
Yeah.
And we have 160 companies covering 32 industries in our AI working group. So what we have found in those discussions with our membership, three things, right? One is within industries, there are many different needs that need to be addressed.
Yeah.
There's a recognition that there are going to be tremendous benefits that come with AI, but there's also sober realization as well, right? That there are some potential down risks that we need to address. And the position we've been taking in terms of legislation is that we need to have a gap-filling approach that's based on risk analysis. If I'm hearing you correctly, we should not be expecting a massive prescriptive AI bill, right? Just one big bill that's coming out, but more of where is it that we need to maybe fill some gaps. So probably more of a flexible legislative approach of addressing different needs in different places.
I think so. Yeah, and I'm always careful, not just in this context, by the way, the healthcare context, for example. People always say, what's your plan for healthcare? God, that's like 1/6 of our economy. What, you want me to have a government plan for 1/6 that you want a bill? No. You need to show some legislative humility here and identify some discrete challenges within, their proper context, and to the extent there's a legislative role to be had in dealing with those challenges, then put a bill forward for that. And that's what we need to do here, as I see it. And I actually think our committee process lends itself to that. We have, during my time here, I came into the House in 2011, we've often preferred, leadership has often preferred, to do big bills outside of the committee process, gives them a lot of power, and we've stopped thinking about legislating in this kind of targeted fashion. We did USICA in a different way. We tried the old way. Members loved it. We got a lot of buy-in to the process. It worked. So Senator Schumer has and this was, frankly, I was not going to get involved in this process unless he assured us there's going to be a bipartisan, inclusive, regular order process at the end. He has assured us and reassured us that's the approach, and that will lead to targeted solutions offered by individual members, which will lead to better legislating.
So let me ask you a question, sort of maybe to try and pull all the threads together here. There's a lot going on in AI. We've been talking about a lot of that today, and we've heard a little bit about, well, we've all been hearing, right, that there's an executive order that's being prepared and going to come out of the White House, right?
I've heard that too.
Yeah, we'll see what happens, right? We have the Hiroshima process with the G7. We have the European Union. We had a discussion today that they're looking to finish up their trialogue negotiations on their AI Act within the next couple of months and probably finalize that shortly thereafter. So from your perch in the Senate, right, where you're, the working group is sort of in the cockpit, right, of the legislative activity there, as you have all these different variable things going on, how does that impact, your deliberations and what Congress views its role in pushing this issue forward?
Well, we don't want to be passive agents, so we need to accommodate these different dynamics. So let me get a little more specific. My friend from the European Parliament is here. I think you may have heard from him earlier. I see our parliamentarian from the Japanese Diet also here. There he is. Yes, sir. And they have been engaged in really important work for their own constituencies. And one of the reasons I know they are here is because they want us to understand that at some point, we're going to have to make an effort to harmonize our various activities. That means there will still be Japanese domestic law and European domestic law when it comes to this, and we want to accommodate the unique needs and preferences of our constituents. But we also need ways to coordinate our activities because ultimately we share so many values and so many imperatives, including national security imperatives, that if we can link together our efforts and embed the next gen and the follow-on generations of artificial intelligence with our values, that's going to help all of our citizens. It'll lead to a seamless AI economy, and we can set the standards for artificial intelligence even for our adversaries. So you win the battle, and none of us want a battle without fighting. That's where this needs to lead. So how do you do that? It's really complicated, but there are some views out there, and I've been consulting with some Indian stakeholders, Japanese, European, will increasingly be in touch. Ian Bremmer, if you haven't read it, just wrote a really thoughtful piece. He had a co-author in Foreign Affairs about this very topic, where he wrote down what he thinks methodologically is required for us to arrive at a place where we formalize the policies of the G7 and the Hiroshima efforts and the other groups that you mentioned.
Well, Senator, we've run out of time. We want to invite you back, as you and I were talking outside, we want to talk at some point about quantum computing.
Yes.
Right, because that does play a role here too, which many people don't focus on, and there is a race going on with that, but we can save that for another time. I'd like to thank you for your leadership here. We look forward to continuing to work with you. I want to thank everybody here for joining us. And as I said this morning, it's time for us to all roll up our sleeves and get to work.
Let's do it. I'm ready. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Thank you.
Thanks.